Close your eyes for a second. Listen, not to a crowd, not to a city, but to a planet holding its breath. The year is 1963. 250,000 souls stand in front of the Lincoln Memorial. The air itself feels electric, the hum of history before it breaks. And then one voice rises, calm, resonant, measured like the heartbeat of time itself. I have a dream. At that moment, humanity doesn't just hear a man. It hears its conscience speaking back. Because what Martin Luther King Jr. did was bigger than politics, bigger than race, bigger than America. He performed one of the rarest acts in human history. He expanded the moral imagination of our species. From slavery to segregation, from silence to song, his story is the arc of civilization bending toward justice. And like all great turning points, it began not in power, but in conviction. Before King came the wound. America, born on the promise of liberty, had chained millions in bondage. A nation that preached equality built its economy on human suffering. Even after emancipation, freedom was paper thin, written in law, erased in life. By the mid-20th century, segregation wasn't just policy. It was philosophy, a system designed to keep people apart, to teach generations that color defined destiny. And yet, in that long shadow of injustice, something ancient stirred. The same current that moved prophets and poets through millennia. A belief that moral order exists, even when the world denies it. In the story of human civilization, every age has its heretic, the one who says no when silence is safer. King was that voice. He wasn't born to destroy America. He was born to remind it of what it promised to be. That's the paradox of progress. Reformers aren't rebels against civilization. They are its most loyal guardians. Martin Luther King Jr. was born in Atlanta, 1929, the son of a preacher, the grandson of another. Faith ran in his blood, but so did doubt, the creative tension that makes real thinkers dangerous. At Morehouse College, he read theology and philosophy, not to memorize, but to question. He wrestled with Gandhi's non-violence, with Thoreau's civil disobedience, with the Sermon on the Mount. He realized something radical. That non-violence wasn't weakness. It was weaponized morality. He saw the pattern across time. Empires fall not when the oppressed pick up swords, but when they pick up truth. And so King built his revolution not on hate, but on discipline. He believed that if you could confront violence with dignity, you could transform your enemy, not annihilate him, but awaken him. This was not naive optimism. It was moral physics. Every action of cruelty creates an opposite demand for compassion. King decided to embody that reaction in human form. That decision changed the trajectory of the 20th century. December 1955, a seamstress named Rosa Parks refuses to surrender her seat. One small act of defiance, yet it ignites the conscience of a nation. The Montgomery bus boycott begins, and the young pastor of Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, barely 26 years old, is chosen to lead. King could have said no. He could have chosen safety. But moral revolutions never wait for the perfect moment. They are born in imperfect courage. He stood before thousands and said, "If we are wrong, then justice is a lie." For 381 days, ordinary citizens walked instead of riding. They faced fire, jail threats, bombings, and yet they endured. When the Supreme Court finally ruled segregation unconstitutional, something irreversible had begun. The movement had a strategy. It had a voice. It had a philosopher of peace who could turn suffering into power. From Montgomery to Birmingham to Selma, King's non-violent army grew not by fear, but by faith. This was the first time in modern history that moral authority defeated state violence on a mass scale. By 1963, America stood at the edge of a reckoning. The civil rights struggle had become global. Television cameras carried images of dogs, hoses, and courage into every living room on earth. And then, the March on Washington, 250,000 people, black and white, young and old, gathered before the statue of Abraham Lincoln, the man who ended slavery, and the man who dreamed of equality, now finishing each other's sentences across a century. King took the podium. He spoke not just of laws, but of destiny. He said, "I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed." It wasn't just a dream. It was a prophecy. He was reminding humanity that history moves forward not by machines or money, but by moral imagination. When he said, "I have a dream," he wasn't describing the future. He was summoning it. That speech wasn't a moment, it was a mirror. Every generation since has looked into it and asked, have we become the nation he saw? After 1963, the world loved Martin Luther King the symbol, but it began to fear Martin Luther King the strategist. Once the Civil Rights Act passed, many assumed the war was over. But King knew better. Legal equality without economic justice was a half-built bridge. And half-built bridges kill those who try to cross. He shifted his focus from segregation to systemic poverty, from the visible chains of the South to the invisible walls of the North. He said something most of America wasn't ready to hear. What good is it to sit at a lunch counter if you can't afford the meal? That statement terrified the establishment more than any march or protest, because he was no longer asking America to change laws. He was asking it to change its soul. He began speaking against the Vietnam War. He saw the hypocrisy. A nation preaching freedom abroad while denying it at home. He said, "We are fighting for the soul of America itself. Not black versus white, not left versus right, but conscience versus convenience." And that's where history turned cold. When you challenge a system's morality, you become its mirror. And mirrors are dangerous to those who fear their reflection. By 1968, the dreamer was exhausted, not broken but burdened. He'd faced assassination attempts, FBI surveillance, betrayals, and growing internal divisions. He was accused of being too radical for moderates, too moderate for radicals. The pressure was relentless, yet he refused to become cynical. He said, "I have decided to stick with love. Hate is too great a burden to bear." Let that line sink in. He's not speaking as an activist anymore. He's speaking as a philosopher of existence. He understood that the real battlefield isn't the streets, it's the human heart. Then came Memphis. Sanitation workers on strike. "I am a man." Signs held high demanding dignity for laborers whose sweat kept cities alive. King went there even when his advisors begged him not to. On April 3, 1968, he gave his final speech. "I've been to the mountaintop. I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you." That wasn't a speech. It was premonition. It was the calm of a man who had already made peace with mortality. He knew the bullet was coming. He just refused to let it stop the movement. The next day, he was shot at the Lorraine motel balcony, 39 years old. Gone, but only in body, because death ends a life, not a legacy. At that moment, America didn't just lose a man, it lost its moral compass. But here's the paradox of history. When a moral visionary dies, his silence often speaks louder than his voice ever could. Let's zoom out. Not in years, but in millennia. Human history is a long tension between power and principle. From the prophets of the ancient world to the philosophers of Greece. From Buddha's compassion to Jesus of forgiveness. From Gandhi's non-violence to King's dream. Every few centuries, humanity produces someone who reminds us progress without morality is just a faster road to destruction. King didn't invent peace. He reinterpreted it for the modern world. He turned moral philosophy into public policy and showed that love, when disciplined, becomes a geopolitical force. Think about that. His weapon was empathy. His battlefield was the conscience. His revolution was bloodless, yet it shook empires. And that is why his story isn't just American history. It's human civilization history. Because every time humanity forgets what it means to be human, a voice like his rises to remind us that moral progress is not guaranteed. It is earned through courage, pain, and persistence. King's legacy is not nostalgia. It's a mandate to keep dreaming even when the world punishes dreamers. He once said, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice." He was right, but only if we keep pulling. Every generation must become the new custodians of that arc. Because if we don't bend it, someone else will break it. So the real question isn't whether King's dream survived. The real question is, are we still worthy of it? In the end, Martin Luther King Jr. was not a saint, not a myth, but a man who decided to believe that love could organize society. And that idea, however fragile, however costly, is what keeps civilization from collapsing into chaos. He taught us that history isn't just written in books. It's carved in conscience. He taught us that non-violence isn't submission. It's the highest form of resistance. And he proved that even in the darkest times, one voice steady, patient, and pure can make an entire species look inward and ask, what kind of humans do we want to be? That's the echo of Martin Luther King Jr., not just in America, but in every nation that still dares to dream.